welcome everybody. Welcome to this very important webinar this morning. And I think all of us have been seeing quite a bit over the last few days about events and the music industry and the entertainment industries, the arts sector, sports, all sorts of things. Probably those areas that didn't get nearly enough attention during the initial stages of COVID. So today it's particularly my pleasure to welcome everybody to this TTF webinar this morning, and to welcome our fabulous panelists. So John Harnden, who's the Chief Executive of the Melbourne Olympic Parks Trust, Harvey Lister, Chairman and CEO of ASM Global, Asia Pacific, India and the Middle East, and also a TTF Advisory Board member. Thank you so much, Harvey. And Matt Carroll, Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Olympic Committee. Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us this morning.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So let's get underway here. Everybody has to start these conversations by sharing some war stories. So I'm going to start off by saying, just how tough has it been in your particular businesses? And how confident are you that we are actually going to see events come back to where they were, or is it just never going to be the same again? We might start with you, Harvey, if I may.
Oh, thank you, Margy. Look, there has been a lot of talk about that, and a lot of doomsday is out there. In my 45 years in this business, I've never seen it so tough for our industry. And if we think it's tough for us, think about those in Australia alone, 7,500 casual employees who all of a sudden had no work virtually overnight. So it's been really tough on a lot of people, and they're the things that keep me awake at night, thinking more about those people than about whether our industry will come back, which it will. I'm very confident that's going to happen. We're seeing green shoots in places, well, in this country, but also around the world. And I'm happy to share with you later on some of the things that we're seeing in various countries.
Thanks very much, Harvey. Matt, look, you know, the Olympics is in the news this morning too, talking about Japan and still being very hopeful, as they should be, about the Olympics. How's it been for you, and what do you see as the future of this major event business?
Well, I think, yes, there was no file in the drawer under P for postponement. It's all a bit of a learning curve. Most of our planning for the Australian Olympic team and for working with our partners have been done. So we've sort of deferred that. And importantly, our commercial partners have all stuck with us, and we've just extended their contracts into 2021, and they've rearranged their program. So very optimistic from the commercial world as well, as have the worldwide partners of the International Olympic Committee. They've all also stuck with it in their broadcasters and so forth. So everyone's planning for a Tokyo 2020 in 2021. No change in the name, which means we don't have to unpick the uniforms, which is quite helpful. Although there will be a very rare coin, the Tokyo 20, the $1 Australian coin for Tokyo 2020 games, minted in 2021. But anyway, that's for the coin collectors. But no, look, it is challenging, both for ourselves, but importantly for the athletes, because obviously for them and the qualification process, and how those remaining qualification events will occur in early 2021. There are a number of global events that should be held. So they're working through those issues. They're probably the most difficult ones. In terms of the games themselves, as you would have seen in the news today, they're talking about a simplified games. The organising committee of looking at about 100 or 200 different areas where they can simplify the games. And the core thing they're trying to do there is A, save money, and B, have a games which is very much athletes focused and sports focused, and be able to manage in this COVID-19 environment.
Thank you, Matt. Now, John, in sports mad Melbourne, how are things?
Look, there's no question it's been tough, and I suppose I saw both sides of it. I was involved with the T20 Women's Cricket World Cup, where we had 86,000 people at the MCG, on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. And then we saw in Melbourne, the Grand Prix, which was to be held, starting 4 or 5 days later, on the eve of that was cancelled. So we saw in Melbourne firsthand, from full bore to absolutely nothing. It wasn't like the tap was slowly, turned down. The tap just got turned off. And for us, the focus has been working with, obviously, as Harvey said, the staff, particularly those casual staff, and how we've been able to support, not just financially, but a lot of people are at home and ringing up and try and help people through this, not just the financial side, but the psychological side. With all our business partners, they had their businesses effectively shut off overnight. For our staff, again, while there's the isolation of working from home, also I'm not sure of everyone, but the homeschooling presented another unique challenge to everybody in their lives. So we put a lot of efforts in helping everyone balance the personal life versus the business. But what's really, really pleasing is I'm incredibly optimistic. Like the green shoots, as Harvey said, are really starting to really come out quite strongly. We've got games back at Amy Park. We've had 2 NRL games with no spectators. There's a lot of debate about spectators coming back for games in late June, early July. I think we've seen with the AFL this weekend in Adelaide, there's going to be either 1,000 or 2,000 spectators at Adelaide Oval. I really believe that while it turned off really suddenly, there's a really great opportunity for this to come back. It will be different. It will be a new normal, but that also gives rise to opportunity.
Absolutely. So, given that slowly but surely we'll come back to this, and I'll talk about the international part of it in a moment, but how do we cope with the social distancing and the other requirements in this space? What happens with catering? What happens with, licensing provisions? And at what point is it just not viable to open the venues? I mean, Harvey?
Well, I think this is one of the differences between sport and separating out entertainment, live theatre and the convention business. Sport has a cash register those other businesses don't have. It's called a television deal. A lot of sports sponsorship is based on exposure as part of that television deal. And there is a real compulsion on sport to get back into business, to be able to get those cash registers for them turning again. They have a lot of people they employ, and there's a lot of other businesses in the economy that hang off that. So, internationally, we're seeing big sports like the NBA, who've got 300 odd games unplayed for the rest of this season. They take about $1.5 million Australian in ticket sales per game. Just multiply that out and see what that number is. On the other hand, their television deals are so strong and their sponsorship deals are strong, they have to get back to producing their product. And so I think Peter V'landys has shown a great leadership in this country, in taking it up, taking the ball up very strongly, pressing the line, seeing how far he can get with it, taking a slight step back and then take it up hard again. And I think that's providing a pathway for other sports as well. Yes, we have to work around the social distancing and those other things. And from our company's point of view, we for the last 8 weeks have been putting together what we expect will be the global best practice for dealing with this situation, including all of those social distancing alternatives. Because whilst the government reversed the car back into the garage very quickly when we shut this down, they're now trying to drive it out again slowly. And that means that that whilst this weekend, both John and we in hosting rugby league are without fans, within a week's time, we may be hosting some in some corporate suites and some other limited numbers. And depending on what the chief health and medical officers around this country see and what they measure with spikes, and hopefully there are none, we may see governments then release that as well. And so every decision we're taking today is basically for this weekend. What we're going to be doing next weekend could be totally different. And I guess that's the world we're in.
John, I'm assuming that this is pretty similar territory for you at the moment. It must be incredibly challenging because just the upkeep on the sorts of facilities you're running is enormous, let alone if you can't bring in the revenue to support that maintenance.
It is, and we certainly had to scale back considerably. And And in doing that, though, I mean, we're in a fortunate position. We are also part of the Victorian government. But while we scaled back, we focused on our single biggest asset, which is our people, and the need to invest in the people. And we have used the period to really tackle, like all of you, I'm sure, with your businesses, there's these projects that you've, to consolidate and do stuff that you've always been meaning to get around to. So we took the proactive step of actually, let's tackle this head on, and put together some project teams around some projects. We called them operational mastery, that really will be some great benefits for the business going forward and to think. So that's been good. From the social distancing, as Harvey said, I think his analogy with the government's about the car's not a bad one. Because also the rules, there's been the talk about the 4 square metres per person, the 1.5 metres distance. Already I think in WA, they've reduced the 4 down to 2. So some of those variables are going to change, which will make it more economic. But I think from our side, in trying to come up in the rest of the industry of what are the innovative solutions to solve this, you need to also think back to what is it the government in all of these rules they're trying to achieve. And there's probably 2 bits. Is one, make it as hard as possible to transfer it between people. So obviously the distance bit. But the second bit that I really think is more important for the longer term is the traceability. So how do you, if someone inadvertently does have it and they mix with people, the success in Australia has been they've been able to track that down really, really quickly. So to me, that's going to be an important part as well, and how we come back together and put in place the various measures, because there will be other outbreaks. There's nothing, there's more inevitable. There will be some spot fires that come, as we've seen, and for everyone to have the trust, it's important everyone trusts that, well, if there is a spot fire, we can put it out.
Mm.
And if I can just jump in there, Margy, to John's point, the ticketing companies in Australia are well prepared to be able to capture the data for everybody who's buying tickets, not just the person buying, but all those attending. And our understanding is that Ticketek, that I'm aware of, have a report that's going to come out later this week, talking about what the public's attitude is to returning to major events, and also looking at those issues of capturing that data so that we can very quickly make that available to government authorities should they call for it. And that's a real benefit for seated venues.
Thanks, Harvey. And can I just encourage all of our participants, if anybody would like to send through some questions, please feel free and we will feed them into the conversation. Matt, coming back to the Olympics, which of course is the ultimate event, and yours is such a unique issue because the games are about the magic of the athletes who come from all over the world. I can only imagine the conversations within the Olympic family at the moment in terms of how you manage all of those different countries attending the Olympics with different athletes, let alone the spectators, should we get to spectators. This must be a particularly challenging part of the puzzle because you want the full suite, don't you, of everybody attending?
Well, it is, and some of the things that John and Harvey went through there is obviously applicable to the games in Tokyo as well. From our perspective and preparation for the team, simple things we're looking at is, we'll have about 480 athletes plus the support crew, so just under 1,000 Australians to take to the games. But what we're looking at there is staggering that. So when the rowers are finished in the first week, they go home. So you take the load off your area in the village and things of that nature. There is no doubt that the Japanese are working very carefully and closely on the cleanliness. I mean, Japan is already one of the cleanest countries on the planet anyway. And they've always had, as you know, you go to a Japanese restaurant and you get a towel, you wipe your hands. It's something they do all the time. And their train stations are pristine. So they'll be working on those processes. So in terms of the village, whether there's going to be a quarantine period, that's still being discussed. Obviously, we're managing it by recommending to the sports they either prepare at home in Australia. Australia is one, as we just discussed, one of the best positioned countries on the planet at the moment in terms of the size of us, so we can spread our team around the country. They won't all be in one area. Obviously, the rowers need to be near a rowing course, other sailors need to be near the ocean. But also some of the sports are looking preparing Japan. And again, Japan has contained the virus, so that we're encouraging them to do that as well. So they're the sort of things that we're working through. But until we get more direction, and we probably won't get that until, and it's fair too, until about September, October, because as we all know, the different countries are coming out of the virus at a different rate. In some countries, they're still obviously sadly spiking with the pandemic. Other countries like ourselves, or New Zealand now, all the restrictions are down, and people can go back to the rugby and back to the sport. So, and there's no social distancing. So you sort of look at that and think, well, that's what can occur. But certainly they're planning on no vaccine. There may be one, game changer if there is one, but they're planning on no vaccine. So things like ceremonies, obviously going to that, you're not going to have 10,000 athletes in the opening ceremony walking around together. There'll be restrictions around that. Looking at mixed zones for the media, how to manage that scenario. And in terms of attendance, well, that's a matter for the organising committee.
Mm. I mean, I think you mentioned sponsors earlier and the relationship with corporates, and that's remained strong. Of course, one of those things that sponsors love to do at the Olympics is take large groups of people as part of their sponsorship. That's going to be slightly difficult and a bit vexed this time around, isn't it?
Well, it is, and particularly the IOC's global partners do a lot of that, and Japan and Asia, obviously an important market to a lot of those global partners. So I guess they'll be varying that experience in different ways. But it's over a year to go. This pandemic accelerated very quickly. Look at where our country is coming through. So we remain optimistic that the world in general will accelerate. The tough piece will come later next year, is around the fairness and balance and the qualifications for the athletes and friends and families from different parts of the world. That's the piece which is the challenging piece.
Mm-hmm. Well, if it's any comfort to you, TTF's been working very aggressively on the Trans-Tasman bubble, and we have now moved into phase 2, which is starting to look at the next round of destinations we might be able to have a bubble with, which would not involve self-isolation, and then hopefully one of those will be Japan. So there you go, doing our bit for the Olympics. We are.
We're in good conversations with our counterparts, the New Zealand Olympic Committee too, about some, how we'd want to say, friendly competition with their athletes.
Well, and talking about this issue of sort of international visitors, but I suppose in a larger sense, international talent. I mean, Harvey, what are the implications now? Because as you rightly say, we're all planning for next weekend. We've got no capacity to be certain about what the future looks like. And while I'm not a promoter, I can only assume that you're booking in those acts way, way, way in advance. So how is this going to work in terms of international acts and so forth here in Australia?
Yes, that part of it is a real challenge, and you are the Peter Volandis of the tourism industry, so you can keep up that good work. Look, concert tours, general entertainment is really challenged by the closure of international borders. The artists are facing this everywhere. There's potentially an argument about creating a bubble around a tour. Where it could be possible to put a case to the federal government about bringing in a performing artist and a smaller entourage, having them come into a 2-week isolation bubble, maybe on the Great Barrier Reef or somewhere, or some resort that's taken over in total, and maybe having that tour continue around and remain in a bubble the whole of the time. The practicalities and realities of that, though, are a different thing. And if anybody could imagine trying to tell Mick Jagger and Keith Richards they were going to have to stay in a motel room for 2 weeks at the airport from the moment they arrived, I mean, they'd be climbing up the wall on the first day. And I just don't think that's practical. And artists are starting to think about what their performance is going to look like when they do come back, even in their home countries. Are they going to be on a runway out from a stage and low-fiving fans and those things? A lot of stuff is going to change. But in this country, there's a fair chance that we're going to start coming back at the appropriate time when the chief health officers tell us we can, with Australian talent. And I think that that's a really good, positive thing. And John and I are both part of a organisation that's come together this week that James Sutherland has agreed to chair, which is the Live Entertainment Industry Forum. And for the first time in our careers, we've seen the whole of the industry come together to talk to government about what some of the things are that can be done. This just isn't financial for promoters. It's economic for our whole economy. And when you think of what major events drive in individual markets, airports and hotels and taxis and Ubers and restaurants and bars and casual workers and all of the things that hang off that, this is a really important piece of the Australian economy and a very important part of tourism. And I think that we're seeing some good signs. The federal government have handled things so far very well, in our view, and they seem to be recognising the importance of getting our business back to business. But we do operate the venues. We operate under a social licence from the community. And that means that we can't just be focused on the dollars. We have to be focused on what is the right outcome in each individual community for the time.
Thank you, Harvey. And if I can just encourage people again to send through some questions. I noticed we've got one from Bruce Baird, and I think actually, Harvey, you've answered quite a bit of this. He's asking, what are the sorts of issues and discussions we should be having with government and officials? And I think you probably touched on that. John, from your point of view, is this going to be the renaissance of the Great Australian Act? Are we going to see a huge amount of new talent? And is there, in fact, a space here to be encouraging and innovating with new talent and seeing what's feasible and possible? Because that has to be one of the upsides of this process. People have begun to innovate almost as a survival mechanism.
Absolutely. And the music industry's gone through a lot of upheaval over the last couple of decades, from, I suppose, vinyl through to digital. It's been quite a disruptor. I think from a live point of view, it gives Australian music a massive opportunity, as Harvey talked about, and that really is great. I think if you go out and when you talk to the promoters, and while we deal with the big promoters, we also deal with a lot of the smaller ones with some of our venues as well. So there's a great groundswell of that talent wanting to get their chance to have their moment in the sun because they've got a great product. So I think that's a really, really great opportunity. And I also think we'll see a bit of a change in the guard internationally, because Harvey's right that some of the big international acts, the Rolling Stones or the like, might not want to go and, spend a couple of weeks in isolation. But I think you'll see from an economic point of view, a lot of others will. And so I also think, internationally, we'll very much see a changing of the guard. The model will change. It will be smaller groups coming in. And that, I believe, really presents an opportunity for Australian and more jobs for Australian in a lot of these tours, where rather than all the production groups and all of that just come in as they go around the world, that a lot of that going forward is going to have to be done country or continent, by continent. So I see a lot of great opportunity, and we need to be thinking about not regurgitating, when do we get back to how it used to be? What is that new experience? And the digital side, just how we're doing this call today, how concerts and how all that work. Yes, you're going to have people in the venues, but I can see there's going to be a far, far larger digital footprint, and how that works. What's the answer? I actually don't know, but I know there's lots and lots of smart people, probably all half our age, that will be out there figuring it all out.
Thank you, John. Particularly the half hour age comment. Yes, much appreciated.
Sorry, Margy. Matt's point
Yes.
before about New Zealand also could be a potential opportunity for us as an industry. For instance, a bit like putting a horse into quarantine when a rider's going to compete in the Olympic Games, it might be possible to consider New Zealand being the country where tours to this region of the world start, and the first week of 2 weeks might in fact be in New Zealand, which there may come a time when the Australian government would consider that could contribute towards an isolation period within a bubble, that might mean that we haven't got performers and their full entourage, sitting on their backside for 2 weeks. So I think some creative things will come out of this. I'm not at all concerned that the digital experience is going to replace the live experience. There's something about seeing things live, about coming to an event and seeing something happen and the I was there moment. That pass from Wally Lewis, that knee slide with Bruce Springsteen when Lady Gaga jumped on stage at Kidos Bank Arena, those things are those magic moments that people like to share together and want to share live. And so I'm very confident that the live experience is always going to dominate, and it will come back.
Right. Matt, can I ask you, because, we mentioned magic moments and athletes before, and as Harvey rightly points out, that's why people go to things. It's for that unexpected and very special moment. And that's something that the Olympics always seems to deliver in volume. Do you think that that's going to be enough to get over what may be people's slight confidence issues about attending an event like the Olympics, or is they already calculating on, a massive change of spectator numbers, or is it really about the local Japanese making up that spectator group this time round?
Well, they had a record number of domestic sales for their tickets anyway, and it was actually getting very hard to get tickets for the 2020 games initially. And the interesting thing, of course, is the capacity of the Olympic venues is a lot less than what they used to be. Sydney Olympic Games, the stadium was 110,000. Tokyo Games, 20 years later, is 60,000. So there's already a reduction in that, and that's partially an economic rationale and building for the future, and for legacy, not just the Olympic Games. And also there's that impact of the ever improving broadcast and digital experience too. But look, I'm not privy to the plans of TOCOG or the IOC in that space, but there has been no mention at all yet of there being no crowds at the games. As I said, it's over a year away. I suspect that there obviously will be health regulations, and depending which country you're coming from, and there has been discussions about as well as your passport, you have a health passport as well. So it would allow you to come into the country without having to go through a quarantine period. But all those things at this stage are a bit speculative. But certainly the Japanese people have bought up the tickets regardless. Interesting, from our side, the people who bought tickets through us, there's been no request for anyone to get their refund at all. People are waiting and seeing. I mean, as I said before, as we're witnessing, things are changing again quickly and things open up. And I think people will be fairly eager to travel if it's safe. And the same thing as the planning for other world events. We've already Basketball Women's World Cup is coming in 2022. The road cycling World Championships in 2022, and today we got the news that the FIFA Women's World Cup for 2023 is looking quite good, and Harvey, we might yet see another Rugby World Cup here in 2027. My friends can
bring it on.
Absolutely. Just don't mind us while the rugby fans in the room just have a mini get together here. But one other thing, Matt, I'm curious about is, this whole issue of consumer confidence, consumer sentiment, what people are going to want to see, what people are going to want to do. You mentioned earlier that Japan is likely to be bringing that event back to the athletes and perhaps making it a different sort of event. Is there a bit of a question? I'm going to ask both John and Harvey this as well. Do you think people want the bigger than Ben-Hur, all the bells and whistles, give me everything because I need some excitement? Or is there going to be a bit of we've been through some tough times, maybe we need to reflect that in the sort of event we run that might be a bit more low key? Are you seeing any of that kind of conversation and argument, discussion happening?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the IOC called it the new norm, and they were doing this last year, and that was to bring the cost of the games down, but also to take out, as you said, the glamorous and glorious pieces that aren't necessary. I mean, even the TOCOG CEO last night, he said that in his words. They're looking at a games which is less splendid, I think. Probably a different word in Japanese, but that's what came out in English. And I think that is you're right. And the world's been through an awful period of time, and that needs to be reflected by sport, because sport is a people engagement. People participate in sport and watch sport, and so that needs to be reflected. And I think as the aim of the games next year, the first one ever postponed. There's been a few cancellations in the past, 2 world wars, so the games have come
Fair
through.
enough.
And next year the theme is going to be very much reconnecting the world, and celebrating. We hope by that stage will be the contained end of the pandemic.
Thanks, Matt. John, from your point of view, this discussion about are we going flashy or are we going a little less so, to sort of maybe sit with community expectations, or people just want everything now? They want the whole bread and circuses, everything.
Well, I actually think even before this, people weren't necessarily after just bigger and flashier. I think it's been very much a quality over quantity, that too often in the space people can get too focused on what are all the add-ons as opposed to what's the core product, to why people want to go and buy a ticket. And I think this is probably going to bring that a bit more into focus. I mean, clearly people, and we've seen it as restaurants open, and Harvey mentioned, deep down inside, we're all hardwired. We want to go out and be with people, and we want to experience things with other people. We want to create memories. So I think very much that the focus will be come back. And if you're going to an AFL game, and we'll see it with the NRL and the like in the Olympics, you want to go and you want to watch the athletes and you want to appreciate all that. So I think it is going to, both from maybe community sentiment, that's what people expect, but also I think there's going to be a reimagining of what is the core of this, and really enhancing the core, as opposed to sometimes the smoke and mirrors around the outside.
Thank you. Harvey?
Not seeing a lot of discussion yet about stripped back concert tours. Certainly seeing some reconsideration about how conventions and exhibitions are presented. And I think that's a very positive thing for that market. It's potentially one of the most impacted, because you're also precluding potentially, whilst national borders are closed, you're precluding your international delegates from attending. And that makes a whole difference to how a conference ranks in importance in the world. And so the convention business is one of those that is most severely impacted. There are some potential solutions around that as well. We've certainly seen some great technological solutions that allow us to bring international speakers to life in a live concert environment. At the ICC Sydney, we set up very early on in this process, we set up a video studio, and it's been flat out doing the Mirror Awards, and every day it's being used, but nothing replaces that live experience, and particularly in the exhibition market as well. But we'll present things differently. Yeah, we'll come out of this with things that are changed. In fact, if we don't make changes as we come out of this, then we've missed a massive opportunity. And in our organisation, we set up an innovations task force back on the 26th, I think it was, of January, when I was in the States, when this thing first started to hit, and we realised that maybe what we were dealing with. So all the things like contactless and no more cash transactions in concession stands. Well, we'll always have to have some cash taken, because there's some people that it would be inequitable to expect them, excuse me, just to have credit facilities. But tap and go, just the changing of the tap and go number from $100 to $200. What a great move that has been. And so we think those things are going to be good in our marketplaces, so people will consume their events differently. But I'm not seeing that in the concert touring business that artists will be cutting back on their production. You see the same performance of Celine Dion at Staples Centre in Los Angeles, the same as you see at the O2 in London, the same as you see in a venue in this country. And I think the punters will expect that. And a lot of that is technology around the artist, and that's not the most massively expensive piece. It's expensive, but it's a bit hard to cut it in half. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of that.
Okay, so thinking maybe on a completely different angle on this, and John and Harvey, this is probably more directed at you. So sorry, Matt, for a moment, but you both run enormous venues. How difficult do you think it'll be, and how the small business and other contractors and not so small businesses who are contractors into those venues, who supply whatever it might be, catering or cleaning or goodness knows what else, how have they fared through this process? And I suppose cleaning guys are probably as busy as Billio, but how is that going to work for so many venues who are, may have to reinvent their support platform because some of those businesses simply won't be there? John?
That's been a focus for us from day one, our key business partners. And I suppose trying to take a pragmatic commercial view, again, from day one in talking to them, because there's no question as we, come back online, the commercial model as it's sat, on let's say, the middle of February, that's not going to be the same. And everyone's going to have to share some of the pain. And quite frankly, unless we have some of these suppliers and that, if they all go out of business, we actually can't put on our events either. So we're all in this together. And, I'm a big believer when times are tough, it's how you treat people, it's the relationships, it's how you look after each other, and you all get through it. And that's certainly the approach we've taken. It's been reciprocated, what I've seen, across the industry, because as an industry, we need to get through it. And as an industry, we're strong because of the sum of all of our parts. Again, all I can say is we're really cognizant of that, of working with people. And I know some people with different things have been very, very grateful. But for us, a lot of the things and the decisions we've taken have been for all the right reasons. But they've also been for the reasons of, if we don't do this, there won't be an industry to come back to. So it's gone well so far. I know we've got Centrepiece, a new function centre opening, in the middle of next year, and that's a particular challenge with some of the planning we're looking to do to get ready for opening with some of our business partners, whether they're really in the place, to put those resources in when they're needed. So again, they're the things we're working through.
Harvey, from your perspective?
Well, I think times like these are the times when the business morals of an organisation and the quality of the organisation shows through. There are some people in our industry who already aren't around anymore, and there will be others. We'll probably know the full impact of all of this around the middle of next year. We don't think we're going to see all that this year. And it's the same with all of our corporate suite holders and sponsors, naming rights partners. And we got on the front foot really early and went to all of them and said, look, we don't know how long this is going to go on. Let's have a talk about how we might adjust some things. And that's caused us in our venues and for our venue owners to also carry a fair bit of pain. It's a cash flow pain. During this period, and of course we're seeing it across 325 venues across the world. So those impacts have been huge. On the other hand, we have to come out the other end of this, and as John said, we will come out differently. People will consume their events differently, remembering that attending an event just isn't about being at the venue. Attending the event is actually from the moment you leave home all the way through the public transport experience, arrival at the venue, whatever it is you do afterwards, and until you go back home again. And I think the government authorities, the ones that we've been talking to, seem pretty well aware that whilst we've all invested heavily in time and in some cases resources to be ready for this, to be able to convince the general public that it's safe to come back, and we're looking forward to welcoming you back. On the other hand, a lot of the other parts of the event experience don't have all those resources in place at all. And at the moment, the public transport systems around the world have been reasonably comfortable with the lower numbers on there. But as soon as there's an AFL game at the MCG again with a full house, there's going to be no even attempts or capability of self-distancing on a Melbourne tram. I mean, it's just unrealistic. And so we're going to see a lot of things will be different in that area. Internationally, of course, we haven't seen all the impacts internationally yet. For instance, we're working on some projects in India. One of our projects, nearly ready to open at the end of this year, has just turned itself into, or is currently turning itself into, a 1,500-bed hospital. Those impacts in those countries are only happening now. We have some venues in South America. Brazil is just being smashed with coronavirus, and self-distancing in living environments in those countries are enormously difficult. And so we're seeing the world come out of this at a different pace. And the positive for Australia is that all the talk amongst the major agents and promoters out of LA and New York is that the pent-up demand for coming to Australia is huge. In fact, I was talking to one of our major promoters yesterday, and we were musing about the fact that if every act that would actually like to get back on the road comes to Australia, as they would like to do, because Australia and New Zealand is one of the safest environments to come to, we would have a real economic problem. We might have 30 or 40 tours in the first 3 months, not in 12 months. And of course, they wouldn't all be viable. And we wouldn't be able to find clear days to be able to go on sale in every city. And it creates a whole different challenge for us. So we are going to have some serious conversations within our industry about just being careful about at the rate that we try and come back. Europe, the borders are going to open between countries at different rates. It could be 12 months before an act can put together a tour right across Europe, which would be part of a normal run. That's not the case for us. And so I think that's very positive for us.
Mm. Well, on that positive note, Matt, just coming back to you, I mean, look, before we all came on air, we were talking about, there always has to be some sort of positive. There's got to be an upside out of every disaster. I mean, from your perspective, what do you see as the sort of positive legacy out of this? And could there potentially be that magic moment where the Olympics comes back to Australia out of this? There you go. That's probably the question I wasn't supposed to ask.
No, you can ask that question. Look, I think it is. Look, and I guess the best way I could sum up the first part of your question is with the athletes. A bit like you were talking there about, with the industries within John and Harvey's area. 44 member sports, they've suffered severely. Their business have basically shut down as well. Athletes who depended on prize money and overseas competitions, gone. The IOs, the international federations which put those on, have all lost truckloads of money because they haven't been able to run anything. So the IOC has put about 150 million US into the international federations. The National Olympic Committees, we're running 2 years out of 1 year of revenue. So it's the same sort of balancing act there. But the good thing about the athletes is that once they had the certainty of the postponement, their resilience kicks in. They just get on with the job. And I think, and that's what, we're obviously saying to ourselves. I've been in communication with other National Olympic Committees around the world. And that's the approach that we take. We get on with the job because the Beijing Games for the Winter Games coming up in 2022. There's the Paris Games in 2024. They're releasing the sports program for the Paris Games in December of this year. Following that will be LA 2028, which will be a great Games in America. And so to go to your question, there's the opportunity of hosting the Games in Australia again in 2032. And as you know, that candidature has been just put on the back burner at the moment for obvious reasons, with governments and ourselves, other more pressing and serious issues. And obviously the decision for that is sometime into the future, around 2022. But no, look, I think, you run through those international events and the other ones and the acts that Harvey, the entertainment acts that Harvey was talking about, and cap it all off of a decade from 2022 or 2032, what a great decade that could be for Australia, both in a sporting sense on the track or on the field or in the pool, but also for your area of tourism and for the economy of Australia. I mean, that's a great way to kickstart next decade.
It's a fabulously positive note. I'm going to keep myself very focused now on 2032. And Harvey and John, quick thought from both of you. Biggest positive out of this exercise, because Lord knows there has to be. Harvey, from your point of view?
I think it's caused us to unpick our business, go back to a clean sheet of paper and rebuild that. That's an opportunity you don't normally get to do in a hurly-burly of a normal week's work. And we've found some really exciting things that we think we'll be doing differently in the future, and some exciting things for people who work for us as well. So we're certainly making some positives out of a lot of industry pain.
Fabulous. John, I am giving you the last word.
It's about innovation and everything, as Harvey said, but perhaps more to me, this crisis or what we're all living through is a chance for us as people to reflect on how much we enjoy being with each other. And as we start to come out of this, the joy and the happiness and the friendships and the memories we all make by whether it's going and doing this, that, or the other thing that we enjoy. And I think that's has really enabled people to have a good, long, hard look at what's life about and what's important.
Thank you so much. And thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us today. I think this has been a really fascinating conversation and a really interesting one to revisit in about 6 months' time, when we all know a little bit more about what's happening. Goodness knows it could be a completely different conversation by the time we get to 6 months' time. So thank you all for joining us today too. Beyond our panel, I'm sure you're all clapping and saying thank you to our panelists. And we look forward to you all joining us again for another TTF webinar in the near future. Thank you all, everybody, and stay safe.